Security. Remove her now. The words cracked through the marble lobby of the Regency Crest Hotel so loudly that conversations stopped mid-sentence and rolling suitcases seemed to freeze in place. Every head turned toward the front desk. Standing there was Danielle Jackson, a 46-year-old black woman wearing a plain navy sweatshirt, dark jeans, and white sneakers. No designer labels. No jewelry worth mentioning. No visible sign that she controlled an $8 billion hospitality empire. To everyone watching, she looked like an ordinary traveler who had wandered into the wrong place. At least that was what General Manager Richard Holloway wanted them to believe. His jaw was tight. His arms were crossed. And the confidence in his voice suggested he had already decided the outcome. "I'm asking you one final time," he said. "Leave the property." Danielle didn't move. She stood quietly beneath the chandelier that cast warm light across the polished floor. The lobby was elegant, expensive, and carefully designed to make guests feel important. Yet at that moment, the air felt sharp, charged, like a storm gathering behind glass. A family checking in near the elevators paused to watch. A businessman lowered his phone. Two tourists sitting beside the fireplace exchanged uncomfortable looks. Danielle simply held her reservation confirmation in one hand and looked at Richard as if she had all the time in the world. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe." These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Danielle Jackson. "My reservation is under Jackson," she said calmly. "Penthouse suite." Richard laughed. Not loudly, not kindly. The sound carried just enough contempt to make nearby guests glance at each other. "The penthouse," he repeated. "You expect me to believe that?" Beside him, front desk supervisor Melissa Grant smirked while pretending to check a screen. Another employee shook his head. Nobody offered assistance. Nobody asked a question. The conclusion had already been written. Danielle noticed every expression. She had seen versions of them before. The doubt, the assumption, the certainty that someone who looked like her couldn't possibly belong in a place like this. Yet her face remained unreadable. She slipped her phone from her pocket and tapped a message without looking down for long. Just 2 words. "It's happening." The message disappeared into the digital world. Richard pointed toward the revolving doors. "You're disturbing guests." Danielle glanced around. Ironically, she was the only person not causing a scene. "Am I?" she asked softly. The question landed harder than an argument would have. For a brief second, Richard's expression flickered. Then he doubled down. "Security is on the way." A young bell attendant standing near the luggage carts looked uncertain. A woman waiting to check in frowned. Somewhere near the concierge desk, a nervous intern stared at a computer monitor, then looked back at Danielle with growing confusion. Something wasn't adding up. But nobody spoke. Not yet. Richard stepped forward, convinced he still controlled the room. What he didn't know was that Danielle Jackson hadn't accidentally walked into this hotel. She had come for a reason. And in the next few minutes, everyone in that lobby was about to learn just how expensive a wrong assumption could become. Danielle Jackson lowered her phone and slipped it back into her pocket as though the message she had just sent carried no weight at all. Across the lobby, Richard Holloway interpreted her calm as surrender. That was his first mistake. The second was assuming she had arrived unprepared. Danielle had not come to the hotel because she needed a room. She already knew every square foot of the property. She knew the occupancy numbers from the previous quarter. She knew the guest satisfaction scores. She knew which departments were thriving and which managers were generating complaints. What nobody in the lobby knew was that this visit had been planned weeks earlier as part of a confidential inspection program. Danielle had spent years hearing stories from guests who felt judged before they were welcomed. Complaints that never quite made it into official reports. Reviews that disappeared after internal investigations somehow found no evidence. Tonight she intended to see the truth for herself. Richard turned toward Melissa and gave a confident nod. "Cancel the reservation request," he said. Melissa hesitated. What if she actually has one? Richard rolled his eyes. "Trust me." Danielle heard every word. She said nothing. Near the concierge desk, the young intern continued staring at a monitor. Her name tag read Sophia Carter, 23 years old, 3 weeks into her internship. She looked from the screen to Danielle and then back again. Something in the system was not matching the story Richard was telling. Before she could speak, Another employee approached Danielle with a professional smile that barely concealed suspicion. "Ma'am, we will need identification." Danielle handed over her driver's license without argument. The employee examined it for several seconds longer than necessary. "Danielle Jackson?" he asked. "That is correct." He looked at Richard. Richard barely glanced at the license before waving dismissively. People can print anything these days. A murmur spread through the lobby. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. One businessman standing near the elevators frowned openly now. The situation was becoming difficult to ignore. Danielle noticed the reactions. Public opinion was beginning to shift, but she was not interested in winning sympathy. She was interested in information. Every choice being made around her was revealing something. Every assumption was exposing a pattern. Richard leaned against the counter. "You know what I think?" he asked. "I think you walked in here hoping nobody would verify your story." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "Is that what you think?" "Absolutely." His confidence drew a few nervous laughs from employees standing nearby. Then Sophia looked at the monitor again. Her eyes widened. She blinked once, then twice. She quietly clicked through another screen. The confusion on her face deepened. Danielle noticed. So did Melissa. "Sophia," Melissa said sharply, "focus on your work." The young intern immediately looked down. But the moment had already happened. Danielle had seen the doubt. More importantly, Richard had not. He was too busy enjoying what he believed was control. Outside, city lights reflected against the lobby windows. Inside, the atmosphere tightened another degree. Danielle remained perfectly still beneath the chandelier, while employees continued building a case against a woman they knew nothing about. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, a notification had already reached the people she trusted most. Systems were waking up. Timelines were being documented. Records were being preserved. Yet none of that showed on Danielle's face. She simply stood there watching, listening, and allowing the truth to reveal itself one decision at a time. The inspection had officially begun, and Richard Holloway was failing it with every passing minute. Richard Holloway sensed the attention shifting away from him and toward the woman standing calmly in the center of the lobby, and that irritated him more than he wanted to admit. He straightened his jacket and decided to escalate. "We are done wasting time," he announced. "If you cannot verify your reservation, you need to leave." Danielle Jackson looked at him without blinking. "My reservation is already verified." "According to whom?" Richard shot back. "According to your own system." The answer landed like a stone in still water. Several guests exchanged glances. Sophia Carter felt her stomach tighten. She had checked the record twice now. The reservation was there. Not only was it active, but it carried authorization codes she had never seen before. Yet every time she tried to speak, Richard cut someone off or changed the subject. Melissa stepped behind the desk and picked up Danielle's identification card. "We will hold this until everything is sorted out," she said. Danielle's eyes shifted to the card. "That belongs to me. It will be returned later." "Return it now." Melissa hesitated. Richard answered for her. "Not until we know who you are." The irony was almost unbelievable. Danielle folded her hands in front of her. The marble lobby seemed smaller now, tighter. Every conversation had stopped. Even the soft piano music drifting through hidden speakers felt distant. Near the elevators, a guest quietly lifted his phone. Another followed. Nobody announced it, but witnesses were forming. Richard continued talking. The more he spoke, the more confident he became. "People think luxury hotels are easy targets," he said. "They walk in, tell a story, expect special treatment." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "And you think that is what is happening?" "I know it is." Behind the desk, Melissa clicked through several screens before suddenly looking confused. "Richard," she whispered. "There is a penthouse reservation under her name." Richard's expression hardened instantly. "Delete the pending check-in request." Melissa froze. "What?" "You heard me." Sophia looked up so quickly that her chair nearly rolled backward. The request was improper. Everyone at the desk knew it. Yet nobody challenged him. Melissa swallowed hard and followed instructions. Danielle watched everything. Every decision. Every shortcut. Every abuse of authority. She was not simply observing behavior anymore. She was watching a culture expose itself. A hotel never reflects one bad moment. It reflects the standards people are allowed to keep. Near the concierge station, Sophia opened another internal screen. This time she found something that made her pulse race. Beside Danielle Jackson's reservation was a classification level she had only seen during training presentations. Owner executive access. Sophia blinked and checked again. The designation remained. Her mouth went dry. Before she could process it, Richard pointed toward the entrance. Two security employees had arrived. They walked into the lobby with uncertain expressions, clearly responding to a situation they did not fully understand. Richard gestured toward Danielle. "We have a guest refusing to cooperate." Danielle almost smiled at the wording. Refusing to cooperate. She had answered every question, provided identification, presented a reservation. The facts had cooperated perfectly. The people had not. One of the security employees glanced at Danielle and then at the crowd watching from every direction. Something about the scene felt wrong. Richard ignored the hesitation. "Escort her out if necessary." Danielle finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but every word carried across the lobby. "Be very careful about what happens next." For the first time all evening, Richard felt the slightest hint of uncertainty. It appeared for only a second before pride pushed it away. Unfortunately for him, that second was enough. Sophia had already seen the truth sitting in the system, and she was beginning to realize that the woman everyone was trying to remove was not a guest who did not belong. She was someone the entire hotel should have recognized the moment she walked through the door. Sophia Carter could feel her heartbeat in her throat. The screen in front of her had stopped being a reservation record and had become a warning. She checked the information again, hoping she had misunderstood something. She had not. The designation remained exactly where she first saw it. Owner executive access. The words seemed to glow brighter every time she looked at them. Across the lobby, Danielle Jackson stood with the same calm expression she had worn since arriving. The contrast was almost surreal. Everyone else appeared tense, defensive, emotional. Danielle looked as if she were simply waiting for a meeting to begin. Richard Holloway noticed Sophia staring at the monitor. "Is there a problem?" he asked sharply. Sophia hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay quiet. She was an intern. Richard was the general manager. One word from him could end her career before it started. Yet another part of her knew she was watching something deeply wrong unfold in real time. "I think there may be information we should review," she said carefully. Richard's face hardened immediately. "Then review it later." The dismissal was quick and public. A few guests looked toward Sophia. She lowered her eyes for a moment, but the truth on the screen refused to disappear. One of the security employees shifted uncomfortably. "Sir," he said to Richard, "what exactly has this guest done?" Richard answered before anyone else could speak. "She refuses to cooperate with hotel procedures." Danielle finally looked toward the security officer. "I provided identification. I provided my reservation. I answered every question." The officer nodded slightly. The facts were difficult to ignore. Richard sensed the uncertainty spreading through the room and moved quickly to regain control. "This is not a debate," he said. "This is management policy." The phrase sounded authoritative, but something had changed. People were no longer accepting his version of events automatically. Near the elevators, a woman holding a rolling suitcase spoke quietly to her husband. A businessman folded his arms and continued watching. The lobby was becoming a jury. Sophia looked at Danielle again, then back at the monitor, then back at Richard. Finally, she stood up. The movement was small, but it seemed to draw every eye in the room. "Richard," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Her reservation is active." Silence followed. Richard stared at her. Melissa looked away. The security officers exchanged glances. Sophia swallowed and continued. "Not only is it active, but it has executive authorization attached to it." Richard's jaw tightened. "You are an intern," he said coldly. "You do not understand what you are looking at." Sophia felt fear rise in her chest. Then she looked at Danielle. The woman standing in the center of the lobby did not appear afraid at all. Somehow that gave her courage. "I know what I saw," Sophia replied. The words landed like a crack in glass. Small at first, permanent once it happened. Several guests immediately began whispering. Richard's confidence flickered. For the first time that evening, he looked less like a man in control and more like someone struggling to hold on to a story that was falling apart. Danielle remained silent. She did not need to defend herself. The truth had finally found a voice, and it was standing behind the front desk. The silence that followed Sophia's statement felt heavier than the marble beneath everyone's feet. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The lobby seemed suspended between two realities. In one, Richard Holloway remained the unquestioned authority of the hotel. In the other, the story he had built all evening was beginning to collapse under its own weight. Richard recovered first. "Enough," he snapped. "You are making assumptions based on information you do not understand." Sophia felt every eye turn toward her, but she did not sit down. "The authorization level is real," she said. "I checked it twice." Melissa shifted uneasily behind the desk. She had seen it too. The difference was that Sophia had found the courage to say it out loud. Danielle Jackson remained perfectly still. Her calmness was no longer being mistaken for weakness. Guests were starting to see something different. Confidence. Certainty. The kind that does not need to announce itself. Richard pointed toward the security officers again. "This discussion is over. Escort her from the property." Neither officer moved immediately. One of them glanced toward Danielle, then toward the growing crowd of witnesses. The situation no longer felt routine. It felt wrong. Danielle looked directly at Richard. "You still have time to stop." His expression hardened. "Stop what? Making this worse." The answer irritated him even more. Pride had taken over now. Every opportunity to step back felt like defeat. "You do not tell me how to run this hotel," he said. Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained calm. "That is exactly the problem." The words lingered in the air. Somewhere deep in Danielle's memory, another lobby surfaced. Another hotel. Another manager. She was 21 years old then, traveling for a business conference with money she had saved for nearly a year. She remembered standing at a front desk while employees questioned whether her reservation belonged to someone else. She remembered the long looks, the whispered conversations, the assumption that she could not possibly be a paying guest. Back then she had left humiliated. Back then she had no power, no influence, no company, only determination. The memory passed through her mind like a shadow crossing sunlight. It did not make her angry. It made her certain. Because standing in this lobby decades later, she realized the faces had changed, but the pattern had not. A businessman near the elevators finally spoke up. "If her reservation is active, why are you trying to remove her?" Richard immediately answered. "Because there are security concerns." "What concerns?" the guest asked. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing convincing came out. The crowd noticed. So did the security officers. Sophia felt the atmosphere changing by the second. The lobby was no longer listening to Richard because of his title. They were measuring his words against what they had witnessed. And the numbers were not adding up. Danielle quietly reached into her pocket and checked her phone. A new notification had arrived. Only 3 words appeared on the screen. "We are ready." She locked the phone again and slipped it away. Nobody noticed except Sophia. The young intern watched Danielle's expression change almost imperceptibly. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Preparation. Whatever was coming next, Danielle had expected it long before she walked through the front doors. And for the first time all evening, Sophia realized that Richard Holloway was not the person controlling the outcome of this story. He was simply the person being tested by it. Richard Holloway felt the room slipping away from him, and instead of slowing down, he accelerated. It was the worst decision he could have made. "Call corporate security," he ordered Melissa. "Document everything. I want an incident report opened immediately." Melissa stared at him. "Are you sure? Do it." Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Somewhere in the system, a report began taking shape. What Richard did not know was that another report had already started minutes earlier. One he could not see. One he could not edit. Danielle Jackson stood quietly beneath the chandelier, while messages moved through networks far beyond the hotel lobby. Hundreds of miles away, executives, compliance officers, and legal advisors were already receiving notifications. Timestamps were being preserved. Internal communications were being archived. Access logs were being copied. Every decision made in the lobby now had a digital shadow. Danielle had not raised her voice once, but an entire system was beginning to move around her. Richard pointed toward the security officers again. "Why is she still standing here?" One of them cleared his throat. "Sir, we have not identified a policy violation." Richard's face tightened. "I am identifying one right now." The answer earned several uncomfortable looks from nearby guests. The businessman near the elevators shook his head. A woman seated beside the fireplace quietly said, "This does not seem right." The words spread through the room. Not loudly, but steadily. Danielle watched it happen. Public trust rarely disappears all at once. It leaves one doubt at a time. Sophia Carter remained standing behind the desk. Fear still sat in her chest, but something stronger had joined it. Conviction. Sophia did not move immediately. That hesitation told Danielle everything she needed to know. The culture inside the hotel was beginning to reveal itself. Not because people were suddenly brave, but because the truth had become impossible to ignore. Danielle's phone vibrated once. She glanced down briefly. Protocol active. That was all the message said. She locked the screen and slipped the phone away. Richard noticed the motion. Who are you talking to? Danielle looked directly at him. People who care about standards. The response landed harder than any accusation. For a moment, nobody spoke. The lobby lights reflected across polished marble. The security officers remained where they were. Guests continued watching. Employees exchanged nervous glances. And Richard Holloway kept digging deeper. Fine, he said. If you refuse to leave, I will escalate this myself. Danielle nodded once. Calm. Certain. Almost encouraging. Please do. Something about the answer unsettled him. It should have sounded defensive. Instead, it sounded like an invitation. Across the lobby, Sophia finally understood what she had been sensing all evening. Danielle was not trapped in Richard's situation. Richard was trapped in hers. Every choice he made was becoming part of a test he did not even know existed. And somewhere beyond the hotel walls, the people reviewing that test had already started grading it. Richard Holloway reached for the desk phone with the confidence of a man who still believed authority could solve every problem. He pressed a button and spoke loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear. Connect me to executive operations immediately. The room fell silent. Guests watched. Employees watched. Even the security officers remained still. Richard stood straighter as the call connected. This is Richard Holloway, general manager, he said. I have an individual causing a disruption in the lobby and refusing to leave the property. Danielle Jackson listened without interruption. The person on the other end spoke for several seconds. Richard's expression shifted slightly. Yes, he replied. Danielle Jackson. Another pause followed. This one lasted longer. The color began draining from his face. Melissa noticed it first. Sophia noticed it second. The guests noticed it last. Richard swallowed. I see, he said quietly. Then another voice joined the call. This one came through the speakerphone. Calm. Professional. Unmistakably confident. Good evening, Mr. Holloway. Danielle immediately recognized the voice. So did the notification that appeared on her phone at the exact same moment. Executive conference connected. The voice continued. Before this conversation proceeds any further, I need to confirm something. Is Ms. Danielle Jackson currently standing in your lobby? Richard looked up slowly. For the first time all evening, he seemed unsure of what to say. Yes, he answered. She is. Another brief silence followed. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Mr. Holloway, Ms. Jackson is not a guest under review. She is the chief executive officer and principal owner of this company. The words hit the lobby like a sudden change in weather. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The air itself seemed to stop. Melissa's hand slipped from the keyboard. One guest quietly covered his mouth. Sophia closed her eyes for half a second because she already knew the truth, but hearing it spoken aloud somehow made it more real. Richard stared at Danielle as if seeing her for the first time. Danielle met his gaze calmly. No smile. No celebration. Just certainty. The voice on the speakerphone continued. Additionally, the executive compliance team has been monitoring this incident in real time. Several employees looked up sharply. Richard blinked. Monitoring. Every recorded action, every access log, every reservation change, every internal communication connected to this incident has been preserved. A wave of whispers spread across the lobby. Danielle finally stepped forward. One measured step. Nothing dramatic. Yet somehow the entire room seemed to shift around her. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. Danielle looked directly at him. You called security on the owner of the hotel. Silence. You questioned a reservation that should have been honored immediately. More silence. And the worst part is not that you did not know who I was. Her voice remained steady, calm, precise. The worst part is how you treated someone you thought did not matter. The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Guests nodded quietly. Sophia felt chills run down her arms. Melissa lowered her eyes. Richard had no response because everyone in the room knew it was true. The reveal was not that Danielle owned the hotel. The reveal was that the entire lobby had witnessed exactly how people were treated when nobody believed they had power. And now the people with the most power in the company were listening. The silence after the revelation lasted only a few seconds, but for Richard Holloway it felt much longer. Every assumption he had made that evening now stood exposed in front of guests, employees, security staff, and corporate leadership. The speakerphone remained active on the front desk. Nobody rushed to disconnect it. Nobody wanted to. The truth had finally entered the room, and it was impossible to ignore. Mr. Holloway, the executive voice continued, calm and precise. Your access history has already been reviewed. We can confirm that reservation records were altered after Ms. Jackson arrived. Melissa closed her eyes. The evidence existed. There was no way around it. Richard looked toward her, hoping for support, but she could not meet his gaze. The voice continued. We can also confirm that identification belonging to Ms. Jackson was withheld without authorization. A murmur spread through the lobby. Several guests exchanged stunned looks. One businessman shook his head slowly. A woman near the fireplace whispered, "Unbelievable." Danielle Jackson remained composed. She was not enjoying the moment. That was what made it so powerful. She was not interested in humiliation. She was interested in accountability. The executive voice spoke again. Effective immediately, Richard Holloway is relieved of managerial authority, pending final review. The words landed with quiet force. Richard's employee badge suddenly emitted a short tone. He looked down. The indicator light had changed color. Access revoked. The same thing happened moments later to several management credentials tied to the incident. Melissa stared at her own screen as permissions disappeared one by one. Nobody shouted. Nobody celebrated. The system simply moved forward. Precise. Methodical. Final. Danielle looked around the lobby. The atmosphere had changed completely. Earlier, people had watched her with uncertainty. Now they watched with understanding. They had seen the entire story unfold. They had witnessed what happened when appearance became a substitute for judgment. Sophia Carter stood quietly behind the desk, still trying to process everything. The executive voice addressed her directly. Ms. Carter. Sophia froze. Yes. Records indicate you were the first employee to challenge the inaccurate narrative and report the reservation status correctly. Sophia swallowed hard. I only told the truth. That is exactly why your actions have been noted. Danielle finally smiled. It was small, but genuine. The young intern immediately looked away, overwhelmed by the attention. Richard stood motionless. For the first time all evening, nobody was looking to him for direction. The authority he had relied on had vanished because authority without judgment never lasts. Danielle stepped forward. Her voice remained calm. This was never about me. The lobby fell silent again. I could have revealed who I was the moment I walked through those doors. She looked around the room. But then I would never have learned how someone without a title might be treated. Several guests nodded. Even some employees lowered their eyes. Danielle continued. Policies matter. Procedures matter. But dignity matters first. The words settled over the lobby like a final verdict. Around her, the hotel continued operating. Elevators moved. Guests checked messages. Luggage carts rolled quietly across polished floors. Yet something fundamental had changed. A culture built on assumptions had been exposed in a single evening. And now, in full view of everyone who had witnessed it, accountability was no longer a possibility. It was already happening. The executive call ended, but the impact remained long after the speaker fell silent. The lobby felt different now. Lighter. Clearer. As though a window had been opened in a room that had been closed for years. Employees who had spent the evening avoiding eye contact finally looked up. Guests who had watched from a distance no longer seemed uncertain about what they had witnessed. The truth had settled over the room, and truth has a way of simplifying things. Danielle Jackson stood quietly for a moment, taking it all in. Not the victory, the lesson, because the real story had never been about ownership. It had never been about titles, wealth, or executive authority. It had been about what happened before anyone knew those things. Sophia Carter remained behind the desk, still processing the whirlwind of the past hour. Danielle walked toward her. The movement immediately drew attention across the lobby. Sophia looked nervous again. Danielle smiled warmly. You spoke when it would have been easier to stay silent. Sophia looked down briefly. I was scared. Courage is not the absence of fear. Danielle replied. It is doing the right thing while fear is still there. Sophia felt her eyes begin to water. Not because of the attention, because for the first time that evening, someone had acknowledged what the moment had cost her. Danielle nodded toward the front desk. This company needs people who protect standards, not people who protect appearances. Several employees listened carefully. The words were directed at Sophia, but everyone understood the message. An executive notification arrived on a nearby monitor. Interim management appointments were already being processed. Compliance reviews had begun. Additional training initiatives were being scheduled across the company. The response was larger than one hotel and larger than one evening. Danielle had seen enough to confirm what she suspected. The problem was not a single decision. It was a culture that had been allowed to drift away from its values. A businessman who had watched the entire incident approached Danielle. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Danielle asked. "For proving that respect should not depend on who someone turns out to be." Danielle nodded thoughtfully. It never should. Around the lobby, guests slowly returned to their routines. Elevators opened and closed. Conversations resumed. Suitcases rolled across polished floors. Yet many people continued glancing back toward Danielle because they knew they had witnessed something unusual. Not a confrontation, a standard being restored. Danielle looked around one final time. Years earlier, she had been the young woman standing alone in hotel lobbies while strangers decided she did not belong. Tonight, she had stood in another lobby and watched the same assumptions surface again. The difference was that she now possessed the power to change what happened next. She turned toward the remaining staff. Her voice was calm, but every word carried through the room. Every guest who walks through these doors deserves dignity before they earn recognition. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Reflective silence. Danielle continued. You do not judge character by clothing. You do not measure worth by appearances. And you never forget that the person standing in front of you matters whether they own the building or not. No one looked away. No one interrupted. The lesson had landed. Danielle picked up her identification, thanked Sophia once more, and prepared to head toward the penthouse that had been waiting for her all along. Before stepping away, she paused and delivered the final thought that would stay with everyone long after the evening ended. I did not raise my voice, she said. I raised the standard.